In the course of our previous lecture, I tried to convince you that the relevance theoretic notion of meta-representation can be used in the analysis of echoic questions, and this notion enables us to present a unitary interpretation of the category of echoic questions broadly conceived. And today I would like to use the same notion, that is the notion of meta-representation, in the analysis of metalinguistic negation. So let us start from defining metalinguistic negation. So we'll start with the distinction between descriptive negation and metalinguistic negation. Descriptive negation is that type of negation that we are well familiar with. So it is truth functional, presupposition preserving, and it is governed by the logical operator on propositions. So this is descriptive negation. So John lives in Canada, John does not live in Canada. So the whole content of the previous sentence is negated. In contrast to that type of negation, we can come across a different type, external, as it is called, external negation, not a truth functional negation. So it seems to be governed by something different than the logical operator on propositions, some kind of pragmatic device that is used to object to a previous utterance on any grounds, such as conventional or conversational implicatures, morphology, style, register, or phonetic realization. And this type of negation is called metalinguistic negation. It was Laurie Horn who actually described thoroughly metalinguistic negation and defined it in the way that is presented here on this slide. Marked external negation, so not governed by the truth functional or semantic operator on propositions, but by a device for objecting to a previous utterance on any grounds. So examples of metalinguistic negation typically involve objection to a previous utterance, followed by rectification or rectification clause. The grounds for objection include presupposition, conversational implicature, it is a scalar implicature, and pronunciation, not only pronunciation, but mainly pronunciation. So we will illustrate this with examples so that you know what metalinguistic negation is. We'll start with presupposition denials, that is metalinguistic negation of presupposition. Mind you that here the term denial is used just to introduce this contrast between descriptive negation, truth conditional negation, and this metalinguistic negation. Though this metalinguistic negation is called denial. So I haven't stopped smoking. I have never smoked in my life. I suppose that you can recognize in the first utterance, I haven't stopped smoking, a presupposition trigger. This is the change of state verb stop. So I haven't stopped smoking presupposes that previously I smoked. And this presupposition is cancelled, as you can see, in the next utterance. I have never smoked in my life. Or well, we cannot say it is cancelled, it is just denied. Or Kurt didn't realize that his camels had been kidnapped because they hadn't been kidnapped. So the presupposition trigger is affective predicate realize, and it obviously triggers the presupposition that Kurt's camels were kidnapped, but as you can see in the following utterance, this presupposition is denied. He has never regretted that he betrayed his wife because he has always been faithful to her. Again, another factive predicate, regret. The King of France has not come because there is no King of France anymore. So here the presupposition trigger is the definite description. The King of France it activates the existential presupposition. So if we say the King of France has not come, the assumption is that there is such a person as the King of France, but this presupposition is then denied. I've just started smoking. I haven't just started smoking, I have smoked all my life, so this is just The same here, as you can see, it is started, not started, but the same category, that is change of state verb. The next category are implicature denials. Some men are not chauvinists, all men are chauvinists. So if you interpret the first utterance descriptively, some men are not chauvinists, your conclusion might be that there are certain males who are not chauvinists, but then this implicature is denied, all men are chauvinists. Goliath wasn't tall, he was a giant. Okay, if we say Goliath was not tall, it means that, or the logical consequence of that will be that he was short. And then this assumption is denied, he was a giant. The room wasn't warm, so most likely it was cold, but then it is denied, it was sweltering. The mice weren't killed, they were butchered. We don't like coffee, we love it. I'm not happy, he's gone, I'm elated. So here, as you can see, what is questioned is a particular lexical item. It seems to be too weak to express the speaker's intention. But you can interpret all these implicature denials as denials of scalar implicatures, that is, generalized scalar implicatures. So perhaps you remember that the scalar implicature arises when speakers abide by quantity and they select a particular item on a scale. And if they select a particular item on a scale by the maximum of quantity, the conclusion is that all the higher, all the items that are placed on this scale above, let's say, the item that has been selected, they simply do not apply. Okay, so if we say like, it means that we do not laugh. If we say happy, it means that it is not elated, it is not more than happy. But here, as you can see, this scalar implicature is denied. And mind you that actually you can distinguish numerous scales in a language. So it is not only the scale of obligation or the scale of frequency, like often, sometimes, always, or the scale of here, as you can see, there might be a scale of the atrocity of killing, for instance. So the mice were not killed, they were butchered. So this is atrocity of killing, of slaughtering. Again, the same kind of mechanism can be applied. And the last category mentioned by Laurie Horn, form denials. We don't eat tomatoes, we eat tomatoes. He didn't call the police, he called the police. You didn't see mongoose, you saw mongooses. She isn't Lizzie, if you please, she's Her Imperial Majesty. Nie żegała, tylko wymiotowała. Grandma isn't feeling lousy, she is indisposed. My dog did not shit the rug, he defecated on the carpet. So here, as you can see, what is negated is not the propositional content of the utterance, but a particular form that is used. So in the first utterance, it is pronunciation. In the next one, it is the stress placement. In the next one, it is this morphology. And then perhaps it is the register. So various aspects of form here. Mind you that in all these examples, whether it is a form denial, a presupposition denial, or an implicature denial, it is a particular linguistic aspect that is denied, not the content, but a particular linguistic aspect, which means that this form of denial is metalinguistic. So that's why it is called metalinguistic, because it refers to one linguistic aspect. It is perhaps more visible in the case of form denials and implicature denials than in the case of presupposition denials. We should also discuss some ambiguous cases, such as, for instance, I'm advocating prosecution, not persecution. I called for a policeman, not a policewoman. He didn't need 4 maths, he needed more fats. you seem amused by my problem. I'm not amused by it, I'm bemused by it. I didn't put him up, I put up with him. Again, we might be tempted to regard all these examples as metalinguistic denials, because all of them represent an objection to some property of a linguistic form of the previous utterance. So that's what makes it metalinguistic. But mind you that at the same time, this objection makes a difference to the truth conditional content of each utterance, because a new thought is somehow conveyed. So we may say that these ambiguous cases are borderline cases, something in between purely metalinguistic negation and something close in a way, in one aspect, to descriptive negation, because actually you introduce a new thought. If you look, for instance, he didn't need 4 maths, he needed more fats, so that can be treated as a purely descriptive negation, and the same can be the same kind of argument can be used if we consider I didn't put him up, I put up with him. These are just two different thoughts, but mind you obviously that there is some kind of metalinguistic overtone in every single utterance, because you object first of all to some property of linguistic form. Metalinguistic negation frequently focuses on and raises an objection to a previous speaker's racist or sexist vocabulary. So it is employed by a speaker who wishes to reject the bigoted or chauvinistic point of view embodied in an earlier statement. And here are some examples. I beg your pardon, li isn't an uppity, li isn't a nigger, broad, kike, wop, she is a strong, vibrant, black woman, Jew, Italian. So as you can see, if you, let's say, compare kike and Jew, the denotation of each of these words is the same, but the connotations, that is the implied message, are different. So the denotative meaning of the statement, what was said under attack, may well have corresponded exactly to that of the rectified statement, but the connotative meaning, that is what was implicated, cannot be allowed unchallenged. Some more examples of the same phenomenon. So metalinguistic negation and euphemisms. I'm not colored, I'm black. I'm not a gentleman of the Israelite persuasion, I'm a Jew. I'm not a lady, I'm a woman. Now, if you look at the next example, who was that lady I saw you with last night? That was no lady, that was my wife. We have to interpret the negation in the second utterance, in the B's part, as metalinguistic, because mind you that this negation attaches to the implicature associated with the first utterance. And this implicature is that B saw someone other than his wife. Okay, and now this is negated in the second sentence. That was no lady, that was my wife. So it is not the truth conditional negation, and B does not want to say that the lady he saw is not a lady, in fact, but simply that it was not a stranger, that it was someone he was well familiar with. Now, so all these examples involve some kind of negation operator, and the problem is the status of this negation operator. So Horn believes that metalinguistic negation is not equivalent to truth functional negation. The distinction is pragmatic and not used in metalinguistic negation is a metalinguistic operator, some kind of pragmatic device, used to object to non-truth conditional aspects of a previous utterance. Kohn described metalinguistic negation in terms of certain formal features, and he called these features diagnostics for metalinguistic negation. And let's just discuss some of these diagnostics. So first of all, metanegation cannot take the form of a prefix un or non. So you can say the King of France is not happy, there isn't any King of France, and it obviously works. But you cannot say the King of France is unhappy, there isn't any King of France. It does not make sense. So semantically, mind you, not be happy and be unhappy are truth conditionally equivalent. But unhappy, where the negation is morphologically incorporated, precludes the pragmatic metalinguistic reanalysis. Compare it to I'm not happy, I'm ecstatic. This works, but you cannot say I'm unhappy, I'm ecstatic. This time it does not work. And another example of the same kind, it is not possible for you to leave now, it is necessary, and it works perfectly well. But you cannot say it is impossible for you to leave now, it is necessary, and it does not work. So a negative prefix is part of the word and thus of the clause in which it is incorporated. And metalinguistic negation seems to operate on another level from that of the rest of the clause in which it is superficially situated. Another diagnostic is the distribution of polarity items. I hope you remember what polarity items are. So there are positive polarity items and negative polarity items, and these are words that can be used in a specifically, strictly defined context. So positive polarity items only in affirmative sentences, and negative polarity items in negated sentences or in questions. So for instance, any will be a negative polarity item and some will be a positive polarity item. Mind you that any will be used, or any words related or derived from any, will be used in descriptive negation, whereas in metalinguistic negation we will have positive polarity items, even though it is a negation. So mind you, we can say Chris didn't manage to solve some of the problems, he managed to solve all of them. But we cannot say Chris didn't manage to solve any of the problems, he managed to solve all of them. It does not work. I mean, the metalinguistic interpretation is not possible then. Now, chlamydia is not sometimes misdiagnosed, it is frequently misdiagnosed. But we cannot say chlamydia is not ever misdiagnosed, it is frequently misdiagnosed. So some and sometimes are positive polarity items which normally do not occur in the scope of the negation. But if negation is used metalinguistically, these items may occur in its scope. And this is the distribution of concessive and contrastive conjunctions. Perhaps it will be a bit difficult to understand on the basis of English examples, because there is no difference between concessive and contrastive use of but. But there are languages, such as German and Spanish, in which there is a difference between the concessive use, and then aber is used, and contrastive use, and then sonder is used. So the claim here is that concessive use is used in sentences that are descriptive negations, whereas contrastive use is typical of metalinguistic negation. Perhaps we can show that on the basis of Polish examples. We can say, to nie jest pewne, to jest możliwe. To nie jest pewne, ale możliwe. To nie jest pewne, lecz możliwe. So in this example represents descriptive negation. Now, to nie jest możliwe, to jest pewne. This is a metalinguistic negation. And it seems to me that we can use lecz ale. To nie jest możliwe, ale pewne. To nie jest możliwe, lecz pewne. So here, as you can see, lecz and ale are not restricted in any way, but if you think of jednak, then I guess the situation is a bit different, because you may say, to nie jest pewne, jednak możliwe, which is a descriptive reading. But you cannot say, to nie jest możliwe, jednak pewne. So as you can see, jednak seems to be applicable only in the context of descriptive negation. So it is concessive, whereas in the contrastive context of metalinguistic negation, it cannot be applied. Unfortunately, even though these diagnostics do apply to numerous examples of metalinguistic negations, we can also find some counterexamples. So if you look at the first utterance, it is not possible that you haven't met the King of France, because there is no such person. But we can also say it is impossible that you have met the King of France, because there is no such person. And as you can see, metalinguistic interpretation is possible in two cases. Or let's just have a look at the second utterance. Walter didn't give his ukulele to anybody. He never owned a ukulele. And it works this way, but mind you that this is a negative polarity item. With positive polarity item, on the other hand, it does not work. So you cannot say Walter didn't give his ukulele to somebody. He never owned a ukulele. And the same kind of, or similar kind of example, Walter didn't regret at any time that he betrayed his wife, because he has always been faithful to her. But you cannot say Walter didn't sometimes regret that he betrayed his wife, as he has always been faithful to her. And finally, in the last example, there is no metalinguistic negation. This is just a case of descriptive negation, but still in German the a contrastive conjunction is used. So if Raymond hadn't been Spanish but French, he would still beat his donkey. So it seems that Horn's diagnostics cannot thoroughly and exhaustively describe metalinguistic negation, so as to single it out. So some other defining properties have been proposed, and here is a list of all these properties ascribed to metalinguistic negation. So first, felicitous metalinguistic use involves the contradiction intonation contour followed by a correction clause and a contrastive stress on the offending item and its replacement. Another feature, the metalinguistic negation standardly occurs in rejoinders to utterances of the corresponding affirmatives. The next property, examples of metalinguistic negations are garden path utterances requiring double processing, that is, pragmatic reanalysis, in order to be correctly understood. The next feature, taken literary, not metalinguistically, the two clauses constitute a logical contradiction. And the final property, the material falling in the scope of the not is mentioned, that is meta-represented, quoted, echoic, rather than used. So here, as you can see, the notion of meta-representation appears. Now, perhaps we will just explain some of these features so that you know what we are talking about. So the first one, felicitous metalinguistic use involves a contradiction intonation contour followed by a correction clause. So, for instance, it will be, I'm not happy, okay, which is either a rising intonation or falling rising. Happy, I'm not happy, I'm elated. And then elated is falling, okay? So this is what is meant by this particular intonational pattern. Now, the next one is that it is a rejoinder, which means a response, a reaction. So, you seem to be happy that he's gone. I'm not happy, I'm elated. So it is a response to the first utterance. Garden pathing means that the audience is led by the garden path, so it's being deceived for some time. So if I say I'm not happy, the hearer may conclude that I'm unhappy, and then I say I'm elated, so the hero is forced to reanalyze the previous sentence and to reinterpret it as a case of metalinguistic negation. Now, the next feature, taken literary, the two clauses constitute a logical contradiction. This is true if I say I'm not happy, I'm elated. In fact, it means I'm not happy, I'm happy. So this is a contradiction. And finally, the material falling in the scope is mentioned. The scope of negation is mentioned. So perhaps we'll devote a lot of time to the explanation of that. It will simply follow now. Suffice it to say that it is, in a way, some kind of quotation, either the actual quotation of someone's words or an attributed thought, or a virtual quotation, imagined quotation. According to relevant theories, all these properties, but the last one, are not necessary. So they may appear, but there are numerous cases in which they are simply absent. But what seems to be the defining property is feature E, that is this meta-representational character of the material under the scope of negation. Other features are very frequent but not inevitable, and we may say that this property E lends itself to the special rhetorical effects achieved by garden pathing and reprocessing. So in a way, garden pathing is secondary, is a result of this property E being present. Now, if we accept this view, that this meta-representational character of the material under the scope of negation is the inevitable, indispensable defining feature of metalinguistic negation, then we can propose a unitary account of negation. Thus, descriptive and metalinguistic negation will not be two types of negation. There will be no two distinct operators, but just one truth functional operator. Thus we can propose a minimal semantics for the negation operator, and to account for this metalinguistic reading pragmatically in terms of explicature, in terms of enrichment. So the material that falls within the scope of metalinguistic negation seems to be of two distinct types. So there is one negation, but there is a difference in the material falling within the scope of this negation. Before we discuss this relevance theoretic account of metalinguistic negation, I would like to go back to these features that are claimed to be defining features and show that in fact they are not necessary. So we'll start with the first feature that relates to intonation, and the second feature that relates to the necessity of the previous utterance. That is, metalinguistic negation is considered to be a rejoinder, to appear in a rejoinder to the previous utterance. So let's start from intonation. Now you can easily imagine a birthday card, and on the first page of this birthday card you can read, "This birthday card is not from one of your admirers." So if you read it, then obviously there is no intonation pattern, and you interpret it descriptively. So I guess that you interpret it in such a way that this birthday card is from someone who does not admire you. And then you open the birthday card, and then you can read it is from two of your admirers. Okay? So as you can see, since it is a birthday card, there is no intonation at all. There is garden pathing, because you are being somehow misled. But as you can see, there is this property, property 1, simply property A, does not hold here. Property C, garden pathing, is realized. The extra processing gives rise to the extra effects. Yet there is no accent patterns. This clue to the metalinguistic interpretation is deliberately withheld to ensure the garden pathing and reanalysis. There is no utterance to which this one is a rejoinder, mind you, because the first utterance here is metalinguistic negation. That birthday card is not from one of your admirers. Actually, giving the reader these clues, that is property A and B, would undermine the trick. Now, if you look at the next example, I would like to single out for special things A and B. Their contribution were not important, they were invaluable. Again, as you can see, there is no utterance to which the negated utterance might be rejoinder. Their contributions were not important, they were invaluable. And then could you please have a look at the next one, which is a slight modification of the previous one. Their contributions were important. Right, but your contributions were not important, they were invaluable. Okay, so here we can see that that speaker B agrees with the previous statement, so it is not that there is no trace of descriptive negation, and then what follows is metalinguistic negation without this previous utterance. Now let's see if garden pathing is necessary. So you can analyze sentences with the reversed order. So the negative clause comes first. The negative clause comes second and the correction clause comes first. So we may say Maggie is patriotic and quixotic, not patriotic or quixotic. I've spared you my lecture, I haven't deprived you of it. It's downright hot out there, it's not warm. So here, as you can see, the correction clause is now part of the context in which the negative clause is processed. So there is no double processing of the negative utterance here. The meta-representational nature of patriotic or quixotic is recognized straight off as such without the preliminary stage of assuming a descriptive use. The negative clause is processed on its first pass as a case of metalinguistic use. So as you can see, nobody is led by the garden path. Everything is clear from the very start. Some other examples illustrating the same point, that is, that garden pathing is not essential. Metalinguistic negation is recognized on a first pass when something is explicitly marked as quotational. So if I say, I'm not his child, he's my father. So I may use paralinguistic gesture of drawing quotation marks in the air of prosodic features in speech. Or, alternatively, a particular context makes the metalinguistic interpretation immediately accessible. So you can imagine a context in which A and B have an ongoing disagreement about the correct plural of mongoose. A advocated mongoose and B advocated mongooses. So if A says, we saw 2 mongoose at the zoo, and then B replies, now, come on, you didn't see 2 mongoose. A may immediately recognize on a first pass the non-descriptive nature of the utterance with its implicit correction of the plural morphology of mongoose. So garden pathing and reprocessing is not inevitable, but more likely with certain linguistic devices in certain contexts. Now, the feature of semantic contradiction. This is a bit more problematical because there are linguists who believe that semantic contradiction is not necessary, but there are some linguists that claim that in fact semantic contradiction in the case of metalinguistic negation is always present. So if you look at the examples below, perhaps we can notice that it is possible to claim that semantic contradiction is not necessary. I will take Miss Daisy as my awful wedded wife. She's not your awful wife, she's your lawful wife. But as you can see, so there is obviously no contradiction here, but this is this ambiguous case in which you are not quite sure whether it is purely metalinguistic or whether it is a borderline case. Now, if you look at the next one, they didn't fall in love and get married. They got married and fell in love. There is no contradiction here as well. I mean, there is no semantic contradiction. And this is simply due to the enrichment process of the conjunction and. As I've said, this point is a bit disputable because some linguists claim that perhaps these should not be treated as cases of purely metalinguistic negation. So now we are back to our essential property, which says that the material under the scope of negation operator must be used meta-representationally. So in other words, it must be used sort of echoically. It is some kind of mention, some kind of quotation. And what follows is just a reminder, I suppose, that you remember the concept of meta-representation, but perhaps we just repeat here to be on the safe side. So what can be meta-represented? Semantic or conceptual content. So if it is a conceptual content, that the kind of meta-representation is called metaconceptual or interpretive use, or metaconceptual or interpretive meta-representation. Or phonetic, lexical or grammatical properties can be meta-represented. Aspects of dialect, register or style, paralinguistic features such as tone, voice, pitch, all these can be meta-represented, and then we call such meta-representations metalinguistic. So these are metalinguistic uses or metalinguistic meta-representations. Mind you that the relationship between representation and what is being represented is not the true spade sword, but one of resemblance. So the point of relevant theories is that we cannot claim that there is such a thing as metalinguistic knot. So it is not the property of the operator, it is a property of the material under the operator. And to convince you of that, let's just analyze a couple of examples, and I hope you can see that all the functions ascribed to metalinguistic negation can be achieved without the use of not. So, would you like some tomatoes? I'd rather have some tomatoes. So as you can see, there is no negation here, there is no negation operator, but the function performed by that sentence is exactly the same. Or, would you like some tomatoes? I'd prefer tomatoes. Or, would you like some tomatoes? We are eating tomatoes here. Or, we are eating tomatoes no more. From now on, it's tomatoes. Or, tomatoes? I'll think about it. Tomatoes sounds good. Sorry, I only eat tomatoes. So you can imagine the context, obviously. So one speaker uses the American pronunciation tomatoes, the other speaker is very much attached to the British pronunciation tomatoes. And obviously what is somehow explicitly or implicitly negated in these sentences is the pronunciation, not the content. But as you can see, only in B3 we are not eating tomatoes. We are eating tomatoes no more. From now on it's tomatoes. We can claim that there is such a thing as negation operator that is no more. But mind you that it is not exactly the same kind of operator that is used in we are not eating tomatoes. Okay? So if so, it seems that this metalinguistic use is not a property of the operator. It is just the property of the whole material that is used, not the property of the operator. Now, if you look at some other examples, did you see the mongoose? I saw only mongooses. Okay, no operator here, but it is a correction in a way, and it is a metalinguistic correction. Or, did you see the mongoose? No, only mongooses. Did you see mongoose? Not one, only mongooses. Okay? So what distinguishes metalinguistic negation from descriptive negation is not the operator not, but the presence of material, of the presence of the meta-represented forms or contents. If I say I saw only mongooses, it is used metalinguistically, not descriptively, not truth conditionally. That is, it may be used truth conditionally as well, but what really counts in that use is this form. Mind you that if we distinguish two negation operators, it will have far-fetched consequences, because there are some other logical operators, and let's just analyze them here. Americans say tomatoes, and the British say tomatoes. This is a conjunction, so as you can see, and is used. This is a logical operator, and this is a descriptive use. Okay, there is nothing metalinguistic here, because we say Americans pronounce this particular word tomatoes, and Brits pronounce this particular word tomatoes. Now, the army slaughter everyone in the village, or according to them, ethnically cleansed it. This is a disjunction, or, and again, this is a purely descriptive use, because we know that ethnically cleansed is a quotation, and this is made explicit. If you say sidewalk, you must be American. This is conditional, so another logical operator, and a descriptive use. The correct plural of mongoose is not mongeese, but mongooses, and this is the use of negation in a purely descriptive context. Now, all these operators can be used in the metalinguistic context. The question is whether they do indeed lose their truth functionality, whether they behave in a different way than in the descriptive context. Americans eat tomatoes, and Brits eat tomatoes. So as you can see, this is again a conjunction. The only difference with the from the example on the previous page is that there is no encoded indication of meta-representational use. So it is not Americans say, not Americans pronounce, but Americans eat tomatoes. So this metalinguistic character of tomatoes and tomatoes has to be inferred. The army annihilated or ethnically cleansed the village. So this is a disjunction, all right? And again, the addressee has to infer the metalinguistic character of that sentence. If you use a sidewalk, you must be American. They are not mongeese, but mongooses. So as you can see, all these logical operators are used in the metalinguistic context here, but their function remains the same. The operators do not lose their truth functionality as a result of the absence of an explicit signal that the material in their scope is being used non-descriptively, because this material is used metalinguistically. It is some kind of quotation, okay? Meta-representation, in other words. Thus we can conclude that descriptive negation and metalinguistic negation are not distinct operators, and this is the relevant theoretic position. It is a material which falls within the scope of negation, that is of two distinct types. So the negation operator is just one, and this is truth functional operator, but the material under the scope is different. Metalinguistic negation is as truth functional as descriptive negation. It is a subtype of negation where some part of the negated material or the whole negated material is meta-represented. Now, if the negation is truth functional, if we accept that claim, that there is just one negation and it is always truth functional, there must be a propositional form on which it operates. This means that the meta-represented element contributes to the truth conditional content. A mix of descriptive and meta-representational elements has to be converted into a single level representation. Now, this is achieved in the process of pragmatic enrichment. So the process of pragmatic enrichment is needed. And what follows is just this pragmatic enrichment. Not, I do not eat what is properly called tomatoes, I eat what is properly called tomatoes. It may be properly called, it may be properly described, it may be properly expressed. So as you can see, this is the level of explicature. At the level of explicature, we resolve this ambiguity whether the material is used descriptively or metalinguistically. This is how we understand the sentence, because we do understand the sentence, and we simply convert it mentally, we may say, in our mind, from the purely metalinguistic material into the descriptive material. By embedding the lexical forms of phonetic representations in descriptive expressions, the incomplete representations become complete propositional forms with the meta-representational elements introduced descriptively. And now, if there is a complete propositional form, it can be negated by the truth conditional negation operator. Mind you that this process, this process of enrichment of metalinguistic use is not limited to metalinguistic negation. Let's just analyze the following utterance. The intelligent bloke sure is damn. The pretty girl is indeed pretty. Now, these utterances are not nonsensical. You can interpret them perfectly. For instance, the bloke you describe as intelligent is dumb. The girl described as pretty is indeed pretty. So this is what is going on in your mind. This is how you interpret such utterances. As you can see, there is no negation here. This is just metalinguistic use, and this metalinguistic use is converted into the descriptive use in the process of enrichment and the level of explicature. This is what is happening in your mind. And mind you that sometimes you can simply combine this metalinguistic elements in one sentence. Actually, this intelligent bloke sure is dumb and the pretty girl is indeed pretty are also perfectly informative sentences, so used descriptively. But if you look again at the next one, the striking modernity of the glass pyramid is a perfect foil for the classically ornate facades of the Louvre. So here the BBC announcer somehow mocks the pronunciation used by a French speaker. So instead of saying pyramid, she says pyramid. But mind you that an utterance is perfectly interpretable and relevant at a wholly descriptive level. So it is an informative piece, and you can process it perfectly well, and you simply know that in addition to this information that you get, you are also informed of the mistaken pronunciation of the French speaker. So, as you can see, the element in the brackets is used both metalinguistically and descriptively at the same time. And some further examples of the combination of metalinguistic use and descriptive use. Have some tomatoes. I had tomatoes for lunch. I had tomatoes for lunch. So mockingly, in the sense that I do not like this pronunciation. So what B1 wants to say is that he does not want tomatoes at the moment because he already had tomatoes. But additionally, he somehow implicitly criticizes the pronunciation. So as you can see, the word tomatoes in this context is used in a double function, we may say, descriptive on the one hand and metalinguistic on the other. And the same in B2. I won't have those tomatoes, they look rotten. Again, tomatoes used sort of ironically, that I do not accept this kind of pronunciation. It's not the type of pronunciation I'm attached to. So I simply refuse to eat tomatoes, these tomatoes, because they look rotten, but additionally I inform you about my attitude to that kind of pronunciation. Now the next two examples are slightly different, but again introduce this metalinguistic use. The first floor is not the first floor, it is the second floor. Oh, now I remember that the first floor is the ground floor in London. Or not all banks are river banks. So mind you that only a part of the negative clause is meta-representationally used. So this is a meta-representation from an attributed utterance in another dialect, or from a non-attributed utterance in the same language. So for instance, if you look at the first examples, I had tomatoes for lunch. This is the meta-representation of a fragment of an attributed utterance. If you look at the example, it's the first floor. The first floor is not the first floor, it is the second floor. It is a meta-representation from an attributed utterance in another dialect, or accent, we should say. No, dialect, sorry. And not all banks are river banks. It is an abstract meta-representation from a non-attributed utterance in the same language. So let us conclude. Metalinguistic negation is available even when there is no previous utterance. It is as truth-functional as descriptive negation is. Metalinguistic negation contains an attributive meta-representational element which needs to be pragmatically enriched. And metalinguistic negation operates on a pragmatically enriched truth conditional content, which means that there is just one negation operator, and this is a logical operator on propositions.